Thanks for joining us today, Rabia. You were very young when you and your family escaped from the Taliban and moved to the UK. Can you tell us a bit about your experience coming to the UK and what you remember from that time?
I was 5 years old when we arrived to the UK, and I don't remember very much about the specifics of the journey. I was together with my older sister, who was 8, and my younger brother, who was 6 months old, along with my parents, so there was 5 of us. And it's a memory that my parents won't forget very easily, so we are told stories of the journey quite often, and I know the challenges that they faced along the way and the dangers that my family were subject to. So it was challenging. It was through land but also sea, and I remember very little about arriving to the UK and being greeted by the border agency, and there was lots of smiles and also sweets and chocolates. So as a 5-year-old child, that was the memory that stayed.
How did you and your family find the experience of moving to the UK and not speaking English when you got here?
I think it's probably equivalent to perhaps you going and moving to Afghanistan and not speaking any of the local languages. It was difficult, but for me and my siblings it was a lot easier. It was a smoother transition because we were in full-time education and we were exposed to the English language far more than my parents. And my parents were also a lot older, and they had already consolidated their knowledge in 2 or 3 languages. So for them it was more difficult. For us it was slightly easier, and I think having the mixture enabled us to kind of help each other bridge that gap. So within the first few years, myself and my older sister became kind of translators within the home, and when my parents were out, whether that's going to the GP or going to the supermarket, we were kind of a mediator and helping them understand things. But after a few years, whilst they went to college more often and picked up the language, it was a lot easier.
What languages can you speak?
So I speak English and Farsi is one of the languages in Afghanistan.
So do you think there is a link between language and identity?
So the topic of language and identity is quite complex. It's an area which is continuously researched, and I'm not an expert on the matter, but I do think that language is a way of expressing identity, but also a way of constructing identity. And if I take myself as an example, when I visit Afghanistan, the fact that I can communicate in one of the languages there, it makes it far easier for the locals to identify with me as someone that they can share experiences with, as someone with some commonality with them. But also, I think it's an example that I could bring back to the UK. So as someone living in the UK and speaking English, it's far easier to identify as being British than it would have been had I not spoken the language.
We understand that your father founded the Afghanistan and Central Asian Association charity that provides education and support to immigrants in the UK. Can you tell us more about this and your involvement with the charity?
So the organisation was set up in 2001, 2 years after we arrived to the UK. And the main aim and the initiative for setting up this organisation was based on the challenges that my parents had faced in integrating into the British society. So as they started feeling like they knew where to go and they could navigate themselves around the system, they felt like having an organisation which supported people that were going through similar journeys and enabling their transition to be a lot smoother would be something that was worth the setting up.
We understand English language classes are offered by the charity as well. Have you enjoyed the process of helping in that area?
Yes, it has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had as part of the organisation, seeing someone come to the UK with no English at all, but gradually improve their English and enter employment and or higher education is definitely something that I'm glad to be part of. And as an organisation, we understand that understanding the English language is the first foundation of building a better life here in the UK. Without understanding English, you're not able to maybe remain in contact with your children or grandchildren in the future as they settle in the UK and learn the English language. You're not able to access the opportunities that are available to you, and quite a lot of the reasons behind people coming into our organisation and asking for help stems from their lack of English. So for example, if they come in because they're not able to fill in a form or access housing, or any other matter, we understand that the root cause is English, and therefore by identifying that as an issue and providing those services, we're not only improving their English language but also their standard of living in the UK.
What are your thoughts on the state of education in Afghanistan currently?
So I think we can't compare today to the Taliban regime in any way. The Taliban regime banned education for women and girls as well as employment, and today we have girls and women in education but also employment, and that's a big achievement. However, according to the government statistics in Afghanistan, 3.5 million girls are still out of education, and 85% of them are women. So there are still many challenges that need to be addressed. However, it's a slow process. Afghanistan is a developing democracy, and it is in its post-conflict phase. So it will take time for it to start establishing its institutions and developing them. So regardless of perhaps insecurity, poverty, and other issues related to accessibility, that people are able to enter education and stay. Just a quick note on one of the great achievements that is quite recent is that we've had our first female Afghan army officer being invited to Sandhurst Military Academy in the UK. And that is a clear indication of some of the developments we've had in terms of education, but also opportunities and access to opportunities both inside Afghanistan and abroad for the female generation.
Have you learned any valuable language learning tips?
So working with the refugee community, I've learnt that when encouraging people to access a service which relates to a completely new language, we need to take a holistic approach. We need to understand why it is that they need to learn a new language and be able to communicate that effectively. I also note that having role models from the same background that have gone through the same hurdles and have learnt English language to a native level is a really good inspiration for a lot of the people within the community. So if we could show them that it's possible, that it's not something that no one else has managed to do before, it's a lot easier to encourage them to take on a service. And what we also need to consider when providing language provision within communities such as refugees is that we need to understand some of the difficulties they face, because some are illiterate in their own language, some have never been to school, they're unfamiliar with an education setting. So when we're trying to persuade people to learn a new language, we need to make sure that we consider their own personal experiences. So someone that I've met quite recently, who's 50 years old, was saying to me that I'm not that encouraged to learn a new language. I'm quite old, I haven't studied before, and what am I going to do with this education at this age? But it's about speaking to them, making them understand that understanding a language isn't necessarily to go on to further education, to do a PhD, or to learn your timetables. It's about being able to engage with your children. It's about accessing your rights and having the ability to vote, for example. So there is so many faces to learning a language, and it's not necessarily simply to go on to employment.
And you're currently doing a PhD at Cambridge University. What are your studies focused on?
So my studies are focused on Afghanistan, and I'm going to be focusing on ethnicity. I'm studying in the Department of Sociology, and I'm going to be looking at how ethnicity affects everyday lives in Afghanistan.
Has your knowledge of the language Farsi been beneficial for your studies and charity work?
Yes, I don't think I would have been able to do my PhD without understanding one of the local languages. A PhD is obviously an in-depth research, and to not understand the language of the country, or at least one of them, is going to be a barrier for that. But in terms of work, it's definitely helped. And I think it's also quite inspiring for a lot of the people that are using our services to see someone who's been brought up in the UK but actually managed to keep one of their mother tongue or one of the local languages in Afghanistan still with them. And I think it also shows the tolerance of the British society, and also the way in which having a dual identity is appreciated and respected in the UK. And that's not something that people anywhere in the world would have the benefit of.
Are there any other languages you wish you could speak?
Well, I think the list is endless. If I had the time and I was smart enough to learn more languages, then of course that wouldn't be something I would hesitate about. The more languages you know, it opens more doors, and it brings more opportunities, so it's definitely beneficial. But I think I would start off with perhaps learning 1 or 2 more languages from Afghanistan, as that would definitely help with my research.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.